This is the Metal Gateway Podcast.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Sibley. I'm your host for the Metal Gateway Podcast. Thanks for joining us for another episode. Every young metalhead felt a sense of isolation at some point in their life. I know I did. Either personally or because their local metal scene was isolated in some way. If you want to learn about a completely different degree of geographic isolation, then this week's guest has a pretty unique perspective on this. My guest this week is Matt Johnston. Matt grew up in Hawaii, near Honolulu, on the island of Oahu. The Honolulu scene at the time Matt was growing up had some really unusual characteristics, which Matt gets into in our discussion, and I found them fascinating, and I'm sure you will too. Between 1991 and 1994, after moving to the mainland for college, Matt was the music director at the radio station KAOS, the well-known college radio station, Radio KAOS, broadcasting from Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Shout out to them, by the way. KAOS is available on your FM dial at 89.3 megahertz if you're near Olympia, or if you're not near Olympia, you can stream them live online at kaosradio.org, anywhere else in the world. If you think back to what was happening in heavy music in the early 1990s in and around the Pacific Northwest, you'll appreciate that Matt had some interesting perspectives, being, as he was, a college radio guy in that time and place. These days, Matt is the host of the PMA podcast. PMA is a show where he interviews various people about cool things they're doing. I'll include a link to that show in the show notes for today's episode. PMA, which stands for Positive Mental Attitude, is part magazine and part podcast and is Matt's own labor of love. To describe it, he says, there are magazines that show you that you can bake a beautiful cake or plant an amazing garden. But what about a magazine that helps you live a more authentic life? Anyway, you can check out Matt's project at getthatpma.com. When Matt and I talked, we talked about what it was like for him to grow up as a metalhead in Hawaii. We talked about the time he met Dave Mustaine and the time he met Rob Flynn. We talked about whether or not Metallica sucks. Speaking of Metallica, by the way, we talked about the time he met Lars. He also tells a great little story about meeting Ronnie James Dio. But there's a lot more to our conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. How on earth did you get into metal?
The answer to that is I don't know, but let's see if we can figure it out.
All right.
So, because I've never thought about it. Honestly, I've never thought about it. And you just told me that was what this whole podcast was all about. And I'm glad that you didn't tell me that until now, because then I would have thought about it and we wouldn't have had this opportunity to sort of unravel it in real time, very organically.
And that's a great, because like I said before, when we were talking just before we started recording this episode, the whole purpose of this is I've discovered over the last several years that talking to metalheads, people do love talking about this topic, even if it's a question that none of them have ever been asked. And I've found that a lot over the years, that people are like, nobody's ever asked me that question before. So yeah, how did it start for you?
Well, let's set the tone. So I grew up in Hawaii on the island of Oahu.
Okay.
I was born there. I've always been into music and I've always played music. And Hawaii as a cultural sort of melting pot is very unique, especially like in North America and like the United States. So Caucasian people, which should not be a mystery to anyone listening, but is my persuasion, are a minority, they're a functional minority. I was very grateful. I am very grateful to have grown up in an environment where I had an experience like that. And I was able to know what it's like to not be the dominant sort of racial socioeconomic group. I was, there was the last day of school every year was Kill Haole Day. Haoles are white people, right?
Right.
And so I was aware of this in kindergarten, and actually some of my elementary school teachers along the way would actually let the white kids go 15 minutes early so we could get a head start on running home to try to avoid getting our asses kicked. So culturally speaking, like, it was a unique place. And as a young person who was seeking out like ways to rebel or ways to be different or unique or be myself and be true and authentic to myself, as many kids do, I found a lot of that journey happening through music and in what music I chose to listen to or what bands or artists I chose to associate with or associate myself as a fan of. So I remember, picking up records like Back in Black. I was very early. Jimmy Belmont was a friend of mine, a really killer guitar player. He was a couple years older than me. For my birthday, he gave me 2 cassettes. He gave me April Wine, Nature of the Beast, and Deep Purple's Deepest Purple. And that Deep Purple tape changed my life, like forever. Still to this day, my favorite band. Still to this day, the best show I've ever seen, the 1985 reunion with Ritchie Blackmore. They came to Hawaii. And this, mind you, in Hawaii, there's one arena. It's pretty small. And we as kids became very aware of a couple things. One, not that many people would come to play. When they did, we were so grateful. It wasn't just that like they had an opportunity or a business opportunity to play in Hawaii. It was that like we knew as kids that fiscally this was not a great situation for them. Like it probably cost a lot of money to get there. And then when they would bring like their opening band or a stage setup or lasers or something that was just like, wow, we were so grateful for that. We were really appreciative and on a level of like, not just like, wow, that was a great experience, but like, wow, we really love that band even more because we know that they went to an extra effort to bring that to us. So when
how old are you at this point for this 85 Ritchie Blackmore
in 5th grade
Purple show?
84, 85. So probably in 5th grade or something like that.
So you're like 10 years old or so.
Yeah. Or 12, 10 or 12, something like that. We could look it up, but
so you're fairly young at this point.
For sure.
Yeah.
And when me and my buddy Forrest sneak up to like, we at this point, we had been to a few shows. Ozzy was my first metal show with, it was like a few shows after Randy Rhoads had died. So I was back far enough to where I couldn't see that Brad Gillis wasn't Randy Rhoads. And I had the tour program that had Randy Rhoads in it, which was usually for those kids out there who don't really understand, like there were no giant screens. And the tour program actually served the purpose of getting you closer than you could physically because you could buy it at the merch counter and then you could sit in your shitty seat in the back and have these zoomed up close-ups of the people on stage. That's what tour programs were for. And then to look at later, but really it was the screen of the day. So I thought I thought I had seen Randy Rhoads and heard Randy Rhoads. I mean, it sounded perfect. And then the next day in summer school, my counselor, who was sitting 2 rows behind me, and I saw him back there. I was like, hey, oh man, we were talking about the show the next day or whatever. And he was just like, oh, he had this bad news for me. And he had to tell me this really heavy thing that Randy Rhoads was actually not there. So then we're up there, we're watching Deep Purple. And I was just like so psyched. Not only was it sounded killer, it was just awesome. The performance was insane, but I was just so psyched that they had brought all this stuff. And so I was Deep Purple fan, hardcore in whatever, at the end of elementary school. Saw my first Ozzy show, not that far after that, right around then. And, there was like a beheading and a little person and spooky stuff. It was really cool. And then So now I'm like, I guess I'm a rocker or like a metalhead. And then I start to grow my hair out and I got a new guitar that was like more of a metal guitar than my shitty like Strat copy that I had before. And, this is like, I think maybe Circus Magazine. So I think maybe the gateway drugs were already happening. Well, definitely Ozzy, but maybe some lighter stuff, like some more just like heavy rock kind of stuff. And then a couple things happened. So I'm now starting to experience what it's like to not just be haole in Hawaii, but now I'm also experiencing what it's like to have long hair as a boy. Like it's funny because as accepting of a culture as Hawaii is for diversity and stuff like that, part of the reason why I think it's such a successful experiment is that there's a lot of taking the piss, like racist humor was super prevalent. Like all the stand-up comedians of the day and stuff like that, like their entire act would just be standing on the stage and just taking one group at a time and just destroying Portuguese, then Filipinos, then Chinese, then Japanese, then haoles. They would just hit every single person and everybody would be laughing at each other. And it was so great because it was funny, but also it was a great way to learn about other cultures. Cause like these stereotypes, they weren't that like exaggerated and it wasn't super mean, but it was just like things, we were just laughing at each other and it just felt really great. So as much of that was happening and it seemed like it was positive and we were all dealing with our differences in a creative way, that was not the case for white kids with long hair and denim vests. And so
it's like they didn't know what to make of you maybe, or
they did. And it was just to chase me and threaten to beat me up, you know?
Yeah.
And there weren't that many of us. And it wasn't just white kids. There was like, you know, metal is, you know, has been seen, especially back then, as sort of this predominantly white thing. But that doesn't happen in Hawaii because you can't do that in Hawaii because it's not predominantly white, right?
So were there native Hawaiians who were into metal at that point too?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like native Hawaiians are like, you know, like 0.5% of the population there, sadly. But, you know, there were definitely non-white people that loved metal. And when you went to a show or whatever, and there were local metal bands that were pretty good. Like Hawaii, the band Hawaii was where Marty Friedman came from. And he went on to Megadeth and he's a huge star in Japan and stuff. There was a band called Sacred Right. And we can get into that later. But so anyway, I'm starting to understand like, oh, I'm different because of this. And I'm signaling to other people that I'm different because of this in a culture where it's basically seen as asking for trouble. Like you're asking to be singled out. You're asking for people to make comments of you. At 15, I got my license. I put like a big sticker on the back of my car that said question authority. And the cops would just pull me over to ask me what the sticker meant. Like, you know, I was definitely starting to get this sort of adrenaline, or I don't know if it was like a validation, but it's like, yeah, right. This is who I am and I'm different than other people and they're reacting to it. And I kind of like that. I like this conflict that's happening because it gives me an opportunity. And I was never like, fuck you. I was more like, hey, what's your problem? Right. I was never a fighter, never got into a fight. Like I never hit somebody, got in a lot of fights, but I always just talked my way out of them. And my record's still clean, you know, on that. So I bring this up because I feel like conflict is a huge core pillar to metal. Like conflict is in, you know, so much metal lyrics, so many metal band names. It's in the spirit. And so this thread of like conflict resolution, what happens when people don't agree, and then putting myself at the center of that in this cultural melting pot of Hawaii, where I'm like definitely putting a target on my back and going, yeah, I'll go down for this. Like I will definitely die for metal or whatever, you know?
Right.
So that's kind of the genesis of it. And then, you know, ask your next question.
Well, where did it go from there? That's the next question is, you know, so here you are, you're probably in your early teens, you're super into Deep Purple and, you know, a lot of other rock that's been in that milieu at that point. But, you know, at this point, we're still in the mid 80s. So, you know, I'm looking behind you at, we're in your studio today in Seattle, in West Seattle, and I'm looking behind you at the records on the shelf, and I'm seeing a lot of mid 80s stuff. I mean, like I'm seeing Bonded by Blood over there, and I'm seeing, Corrosion of Conformity, and I'm seeing Destruction, and I'm seeing, a lot of mid 80s thrash on the wall behind you. Okay, so where did this stuff come up? And you're obviously right now you're wearing a Possessed Seven Churches t-shirt. So this is all coming out of that same time frame.
Correct.
So when did you discover that stuff? Because obviously, it's a huge part of your record collection, I can see.
Yeah. So I did that on purpose to sort of, I drew up a dopamine receptor map of my youth. So that's just, that's where I'm coming from. I had to leave a couple on the ground, but.
No, that's okay. I mean, the other ones that I probably are worth noting other than Seven Churches are, Show No Mercy, Taking Over by Overkill, which I saw them on that tour. Killing Is My Business, Unleashed in the East. What am I missing? I mean, yeah, those are the ones that I think of. Like, those are records that jump out at me because those were all like really big ones for me too.
Okay, so I'll bring some other ones in. So, because they're core to the story. So I'm listening to Deep Purple, which is sort of like the entry point, and then I'm ramping up on Ozzy and maybe like a little bit of learning how to smoke cigarettes to Too Fast for Love and the Drainage Ditch with my skateboard. There's also like a punk scene like emerging at the same time. So we're getting a little bit of that, because we already noticed like, hey, there's so few of us. We need to stick together. So like the punk and the metal scenes, crossover was actually happening pretty early in Hawaii. And there are a bunch of bands in the Hawaii punk metal history that were crossover that were way before like DRI or COC and stuff. So then these two brothers, well, actually their dad and these two brothers opened this store called The Cavern. And it was in Honolulu. It was like, there was a Big Tower Records and a store called Jellies across the street. There's these huge, as record stores used to be, like these huge kind of gigantic record stores. And then about 6 blocks away on that same street was this tiny little store called The Cavern. And the two brothers, one played bass in a band that was adjacent to my band. So I was already playing music at this time. And really great bass player, super technical. And then his brother had this really cool band called Rurik. And it was basically just him, kind of an early Nine Inch Nails kind of dark industrial thing. But their dad had this store. And so my mom would go, because the big shopping mall was there. My mom would go to shopping to Sears or whatever. And I asked her one time to drop me off at this place that I heard of, The Cavern. And she's like, okay. And it's upstairs in this 2-story building. Super nondescript. There's just a small sign that says The Cavern, totally blacked out windows. And my mom, like, God bless her, just like dropped me off and let me go up there. I don't even know if she watched me walk in. And I just remember walking up the stairs and going up there. And in Hawaii, like, all the exterior doors all the front doors are exteriors. There's like, even the shopping malls are outdoors, right? So you walk in and it's just like, I'm standing in front of this door and I can hear some stuff inside. I open the door and there's the dad, one guy behind this big long counter in the back. And it's just all these records, like shelves of records and cassettes. And it was just all imported, all indie metal. I think I had maybe like $25. So I went through the thing and I could, at the time, was like, cassettes were kind of my jam. I didn't really have a turntable. I had to play records on my parents' stereo, but I did have a Walkman. I had that first silver Sony Walkman. And so I talked to him and he's like, what do you like? And I said, well, I kind of like this. I kind of like that. And he's like, okay. I bought Accept, Restless and Wild, brand new, still wrapped. I bought Raven, All for One, brand new, still wrapped. And then I bought Slayer, Haunting the Chapel, used, which to this day, I think, like, who the fuck sold that? Right? So, okay. So thank you, whoever sold that to The Cavern.
No kidding.
That was a huge discovery for me. So
that poor guy, whoever he was, like, he was like, he picks up Haunting the Chapel in like 1984. He's like, I don't want
Yeah.
I don't want anything to do with this. That's too much for me or whatever.
Maybe it was like, not today. Maybe
Yeah,
like,
maybe.
I'll come back to this. So let's just think positively.
For sure.
So, because you're right. Catastrophic decision.
It was a bad call on his part,
Yeah.
I think.
Probably dead now, actually.
On the positive side, it helped you out in a huge way.
For sure.
Yeah.
So now I'm like on the bus to school. Now I'm in my bedroom. I'm in the back seat of the car. I'm listening to those 3 tapes. Like if you, I mean, we've all heard the first moments of Restless and Wild by Accept, like the Heidi, Heido, Haida, like German, whatever that is, recording, and the way that first riff kicks in and fast as a shark so this is the North American version, because I think the sequence is different in the German version, but fast as a shark, like that blew me away. That was like that was a really incredible moment for me, as in terms of introducing me to what metal could be versus what I had thought it was. Right. So coming from Deep Purple, and I knew about Sabbath, but I was like, Deep Purple is whatever. That's heavy. Then Ozzy was like, oh shit, like that's metal. Like I think that's real metal. And then listening to Accept, I was like, okay, well, I had no idea what metal could actually be, right? Then put Raven in there. Super weird. Like not the heaviest music, but more like lyrical, and I thought that I understood what they were saying a little bit more than what I was getting out of Accept, in terms of just like take control, mind over metal, like all for one for all. Like this is the conflict. This is where I'm like, okay, like my life has been sort of this, navigating these oceans of conflict. And now here's these dudes telling me, like, giving me some solutions, some strategies for how to feel good about myself when I'm standing up for something. And then Haunting the Chapel was just like, holy shit. And so those 3 lasted me for like 2 weeks. And I explored every nook and cranny of those cassettes. And then I went back and bought Hell Awaits, and I gotta say, didn't like it. Like I was like, like something about it. It seemed, I think it was like the sound quality, and it felt too unstructured for me. It was like, that's another thing metal kind of is it's structured. It's there's not a lot of like equivalents to free jazz in that era of metal, and if there were, I wasn't listening to them. I wanted riffs, and I wanted 4 on the floor. And so Hell Awaits scared me a little bit, or just turned me off. But at that point, the Cavern was going. I was off to the races, and really became a huge consumer fan, like zealot of that 80s indie metal time period, like all the way up to, 89. Every single spare dollar that I had, as soon as I got my license, once a week, we got out of school early on Wednesdays. Me and my friend Jeff got in my car. We had a route. We would hit to all these used record stores, go straight to the metal sections, grab everything we hadn't heard before, listen to it all, and buy as much of it as we could afford.
After that first day, you went to the Cavern and you picked up those Accept and Raven and Haunting the Chapel. Did your mom pick you up?
Yes.
And did you like have these things in a bag? Did you tell her what you bought, or did you show her?
No, I never had to hide anything from my mom. So there was definitely no act to like hide it.
But did she engage you on it, or what was I'm just sort of curious.
Not really.
Yeah.
No, it was like that 70s, 80s parenting.
It was like, oh, that's what you're into. Okay, cool. All right. Anyway, yeah.
She probably asked like if I had any money left. She was probably more concerned about that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we're in the mid 80s now. Where did it go from there? Like, what were some of the things that really were big kind of watershed moments for you, kind of as we're heading towards the end of the 80s?
So as I mentioned, we didn't get a lot of shows, but we did get some. And when we couldn't get what we were seeing in Circus or Kerrang or whatever, we were Metal Hammer, we would go to local metal shows. And it was interesting because being on an island, being isolated, those local bands did have an advantage because their fan base was pretty hungry because we weren't being inundated with a bunch of, we weren't seeing a lot of metal bands. So we went to go to local shows a lot. And the ones that we could get into as kids, we really got into them. And I took guitar lessons from this guy, Mark Kalevahea, who is the lead guitar player and singer for a band called Sacred Rite, not Sacred Reich, but Sacred Rite. Yep. From Hawaii. And so, that was really cool because I'm basically sitting in this stuffy little room learning these riffs from this, our version of like a metal god kind of guy, but also brought him down to earth. And I think, so we saw a lot of shows, we started bands, we learned instruments, and we collected records, and we would sit around and listen to stuff. And I miss the days where it was a really fun event and a regular thing to just take a boombox with some cassettes and go sit on a bluff and just watch the sunset and just listen to metal and drink some beers that we stole from our parents' fridge or whatever. And it was just all about just listening to the music, a lot of car time, a lot of just sitting in the car in the school parking lot, getting there early, just, dude, listen to this. Mm-hmm. So definitely that, getting into some local bands. And then some shows started to arrive. Like Dio came 3 times, but the first 2 times were amazing because not only did Dio bring the full stage, presumably on the way to Japan as a stopover, let's unpack the gear, let's do the show and then put it back and then let's keep going. Mm-hmm. But Dio brought the opening bands. So it's the first time it was Dokken on Breaking the Chains, and second time it was Yngwie. I might have those reversed, but I think the second time was Yngwie Malmsteen, and not the heaviest bands, but fucking Dio, right? And giant dragon with lasers coming out of the eyes, and he did that for us. He didn't have to do that because we saw, so and so 3 weeks ago, and they didn't have shit.
Yeah, it
right?
was just 4 guys on a stage,
right?
Yeah.
And then Metallica came, and I can kind of connect this story to something that happened later, but Metallica came, and Master of Puppets, Cliff Burton, full set. They brought, who did they have? They had somebody really cool opening for them that I can't remember now. We could look that up, but that was just incredible, right? Because if there was one record that really just drove the nail, I know this is true for so many people and it's probably cliche at this point, but Kill 'Em All just really it just crystallized the entire vision. It was okay, right? Sound, feel, execution, spirit. So all this thing I'm talking about, conflict, what you start the conflict, you own the conflict, you can resolve the conflict. And through that resolution, you're owning it. You're I'm standing for it, but I'm also, I can be the solution as well as the instigation, and come with me on this journey.
Yeah. You become a self-actualized being, right? Which
is a huge lesson to learn as a kid, right?
Totally.
Right. And I think that's in a lot of metal. So there's Cliff, and just I was on that side of the stage. I watched him for most of the night. It was my first Metallica show. I was blown away by that. And then in 9th grade, I was really big into computers at the time. So I had an Apple II and a modem, and I was doing lots of communicating illegally with people on the mainland using at the time, kids, you could make a long distance call, but you could use a third-party service to get a cheaper rate. So you would call a local number, you would punch in a 7-digit code, and you would get another dial tone, and then it would bill you back for that call based on whatever code you put in there. So I programmed my computer to call the local number, put a fake code in, try a long distance number that I knew would be a computer that would answer. If my computer recognized the other computer, then it was a good code. If it didn't, if it got a busy signal, whatever, bad code. And so my computer would just cycle all night, give me these new codes that would work. And then I would use those codes to call other metalheads that I would find on these message boards. And we would talk about music and trade songs and trade. We would just talk about metal. So I was kind of like this metal hacker kind of. And so I was into that, and I had met this guy through that had a radio show on KTUH, the University of Hawaii College radio station. And so we would talk on the phone all the time. And one time he was just like, hey, why don't you come down and check out my radio show? I was like, oh, okay, cool. So he let me in, and I was like looking at all the records, and he was playing all kinds of crazy stuff. Not metal. He was playing all kinds of other stuff. I think the most metal thing he played was like Attila, which is like Billy Joel's first band. But I was like, hey, play this. Or I would bring a couple records. I'd be like, play this. And so I was like this little guest star, and I kept appearing. And then finally I took a test, got my license, and I could sub for him. So I started subbing for him kind of a lot because he was kind of over it. And so I had this unofficial metal show on this Hawaii radio station in 9th or 10th grade. So that was a big deal because I could promote these records that I thought were cool. I had access to the library, so they were getting serviced by different labels. So I was able to find new music there for free. And then also I was representing metal on the airwaves in Hawaii, and people were calling in like, hey, who are you? Like, I'm this guy. So I was meeting people that way.
Yeah.
And so that's how I hooked up with Pat Oda, who was very kind enough to make me associate editor for Iron Cross magazine, which is a little metal zine that he started. And I was a participant in that for a couple of years.
And that was based in Honolulu as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So now
I've seen a lot of fanzines in my day, but I've never seen that one.
Yeah, it's rare and is Hawaii only, but we got lots of demos. I have a really cool shoebox of cassette demos because back then, it was all about tape trading.
Yep.
And I have No Life Till Leather. I have a Megadeth demo that is like a Kodak photo with a handwritten Dave Mustaine, like a lot of cool demos that were sent to us. I got exposed to a lot of cool new music through that. I mean, that issue right there has Voivod, Iron Angel, COC, At War, Hyrax, and Warfare. And, that's like most of those records.
There's one underneath it. It has Exploited and
a bunch of bands. 7 Seconds, Not Friday. This was more punk.
Yeah, more of a punk one.
So I did some zine publication stuff, getting exposed to more and more. I'm like going deeper and deeper underground. And I'm becoming more and more kind of associated with this stuff. And also just to be real, like I also really liked, when hip hop started to come out in the mid 80s, I really liked that. Mm-hmm. So I'm in Hawaii, like there was some reggae that I really loved. Like I wasn't just into metal. I was just mostly into metal.
I'm really skeptical of any metalhead who says they're only into metal. Like there's these dudes out there like, I only listen to brutal death metal. I'm like, okay, good for you, dude. But I don't buy it for a second. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you just can't. Anyway, that's a totally separate issue. I'm really curious because what you've just described to me is really interesting to me. You've just described this kind of microcosm in Honolulu at that time that is, I think in a lot of ways, before the internet, every local metal scene was isolated in its own way. But Honolulu is isolated quite literally, physically, in a way that, I felt like, so I grew up in Denver, right? And I felt like when I was a kid in the 80s, our metal scene was fairly isolated, but not in the way that Honolulu would have been. So what I'm really curious to have you tell me about is like, what was that scene like, Because you guys didn't get, pretty much everybody who toured came through Denver, right? Because it was on the way between Chicago and San Francisco and LA, they would stop in Denver, right? So I got to see a lot of shows, which was cool. But our scene was weird and fragmented in its own way. But what was the scene like in Honolulu at that time? Like, was there a lot of combination between like the metal and the punk scene, or were those even separate scenes, right? Like, because you're also a skateboarder too, so there was probably a lot of that, right?
Yep,
a lot of overlap there. So like, tell me about that, because I think that stuff's really interesting.
Okay, yeah. So I am sort of a floater, and always have been, and didn't really feel comfortable tunneling down or being exclusive into like one group or group of people or whatever. In fact, I really kind of liked being like the super metal guy at the Broken Man or Mean Ugly Guys punk shows by the university. Like, I didn't mind showing up with long hair. I did like, and again, like, I've never been afraid. I'm just not afraid of anything usually. And I'm not really, I didn't get that gene. My life would have been a lot easier if I had some, useful, healthy fear responses, but I just don't. So I would just show up, and at first people would be dicks, and then they would just be cool and realize that that's not going to work. So like, okay, whatever. Oh, and like you publish Iron Cross with Pat Oda, like, oh, well, you must be cool then because Pat's cool. And then I would like, I'm a fan. Like, I'm a genuine, honest, like, fan. I love it when people put their hearts into something, and I appreciate that, and it makes me feel good when they do it. So I think that at the end of it is like, the most important thing is like, it's people who have that same kind of intention and that same spirit and are enjoying music in the same way at a deep level. And then those people just get together no matter what scene they're in. But the punk scene in Hawaii, so there was like new wave scene, and those people were a little older than me, but I played up. So I did kind of know some of those folks. And then that started to transition into this punk scene. And it wasn't really a metal scene in the sense that the local bands were born out of these like cover bands because Hawaii is such a tourist industry. So there were like some cover rock bands with like some spandex and stuff like that. And some of those musicians formed these heavier bands, but not until kind of like after Kill 'Em All, like not until later. So like outside of Hawaii got actual like heavy metal a little bit late. Most of the signal that was coming in that was influential was on the more Aussie Motley Crue kind of side. So if you imagine this new wave, this group of kids that was like new wave that had like gotten more hardcore into punk, how like that Motley Crue stuff's going to look. It's like, they're not really down with that. Those two scenes didn't really merge or hang out much. In fact, there wasn't really much of like a glam or hard rock scene. It was just sort of like, that's just what people liked. But then when thrash came around, now there's a little bit more common ground between punk and metal. And there was some initial kind of like the long hairs and the spiky hairs or whatever. But because of the relatively few venues, especially all ages venues, they had to book both kinds of shows. There was no like explicitly punk venue or explicitly metal venue because you couldn't afford to do that. There was no business there. And then all of a sudden, like, crossovers happening, and it's just probably just like every other town. And so it started to mix a little bit more. But in my high school, the metalheads, it was like a movie. It was like a John Hughes movie. It was like the metalheads were over there by that tree smoking those cigarettes. And then the punks were over there by that garbage can smoking the hand-rolled cigarettes. Right?
Yep.
And so I think it was pretty classic in that sense. But in terms of maybe the isolation that you're very astutely calling out, mostly led to sort of a delay in that heavier sort of metal being a sort of more popular, and then that being an opportunity for those scenes to realize that they had a lot more in common.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think the other thing that I've sort of observed over the years with various things, I mean, metal and other things, but oftentimes, culturally speaking, when there's an isolation factor involved where, a scene can't sort of borrow from, you're not like, for example, you're not in close enough proximity geographically to like Seattle or something to be able to borrow culture from Seattle. So you just create your own because that's what you do. It's, it's necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I'm sort of interested in that, like, local scenes are especially at that time, I think, because it was tape trading, and it was zines that were made, black and white copies at Kinko's, and, cut and paste collage style stuff. I mean, and the people in the scenes who had access to certain outside inputs, like, so-and-so you can get Maximum Rock and Roll at this record store, right? Back then, this was like before the internet, like how we discovered music was like, you grabbed whatever you could grab because you were hungry. So that stuff's, I just think that stuff's interesting because the scenes are, the way that they create and solve the problems of scarcity is different everywhere, right? And so, yeah, some scenes like the punks and the metalheads, like never the twain shall meet, right? Some scenes, like you said, in a smaller community or a more isolated community, it's not big enough to support separate venues, so everybody gets all intermingled and everybody eventually becomes cool with it. Like that stuff's cool, and I think that stuff's happening now too. It's just I think things are different. I don't know. So maybe this is a good segue because I want to talk about where things are today, both like at the macro level and for you personally, and where like where do you think it's going? Like I want to talk about where things are now and where things are headed.
Okay.
Right. So we've talked about some of your early influences, but like, what's going on for you with metal today? Like, what are you super into right now?
That's a great question. So I still actively like seek out new music all the time. It's funny that like, because of the internet, it seems like it should be easier, but for some reason, I don't find new bands as often that I really like, and I'm actively fighting this thing that, I think as we get older, we all experience, which is just like, it feels like you're sort of, I don't know if it's like the lack of neuroplasticity or if it's just, I don't know what it is, but it's like the things that you knew you liked before make you feel better. And then like things that challenge you are like, challenging used to be the thing that made me feel good. Like hearing something new and challenging used to be the thing that I wanted to experience. But now it seems like I have to work harder to get myself into that space where I'm open to it, but I'm constantly just fighting to be in that space because I know that's where I want to be. Like in my heart, that's where I want to be. And nothing makes me happier than like discovering something new because it doesn't happen as often. But if I find something new that I really like, I love that. So just to go from, like ancient history to just like yesterday. And this was like, this is truly a contemporary story. So, Spotify, as much as people fear and despise artificial intelligence and, before real AI, it was like an algorithm, obviously, or multiple algorithms, but the way that Spotify kind of says, hey, I see what you've been listening to. Why don't you try these things? Right. And this band called Spirit World came up and the album was like Death Western and I'd never heard of it before. And I looked at the art before I played it and I'm like, oh, it's like, what's up with this Texas? I just, who knows what I was going to hear, but holy shit, it was really great. But here's the thing, to be super transparent, I know why I liked it. It's because it was super derivative of the things that I loved. Like I heard Slayer in there, but the thing I think that keeps me away from a lot of contemporary metal where it seems to have gone is like, I talked about how Raven, and the lyrics were something that I was connecting with, and I really liked that, even though it wasn't as heavy. I miss that in a lot of modern metal. I just don't feel like I'm connecting with what they're talking about as much. And in some cases, I literally can't understand it. And I know that makes me sound old, but I think it's just like, I want to know what they're saying. I want to hear what they're talking about. And then I don't need like operatic melodic vocals. I'm not that person, but I do kind of need like some sort. I think it's more important for me to have like that rhythmic cadence. Like a good example is like Lamb of God. It's not super melodic, but the the rhythmic cadence of his delivery is so awesome. And I think it's just like he's participating in the creation of the music with the band in a way that I really like a vocalist to do. I feel like he's super engaged with the rhythm section.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, if you think of a band as sort of like a continuum where you've got the singer on one end and the drummer on the other end, and the bass players between the drummer and the guitar player, and the guitar player's here, and then the singer's on the end. If the singer and the drummer are playing together, like that's what I love, because I think that thread just connects everything together. So I love bands like, they're more mainstream, but I love bands like Lamb of God, even though they're not super melodic all the time. And it doesn't have to have a sing-songy chorus to make me happy. You can just be,
yeah.
And then there's like, I actually like I bought a couple Tombs records that I liked. Modern metal, I think, has taken so many different paths and has expanded. The genre metal doesn't even explain, like, I think explains the minority of what's out there today, like all the subgenres and everything. And I think, it's harder because of that. It's harder for me to orient myself towards new artists in the same way that I used to do it in the past. So it's like, I don't find myself at shows as often being exposed by surprise to some new band that I'm like, oh, that was really cool. Because, a lot of times you just have to see the band in person to really get what they're doing. So that's missing. And then also, like, I don't know why, but because I listen to as much stuff as possible, I just try to, it's so easy now to just sample things, but I'm not, it's either I've already heard it, or the way that they're doing something differently doesn't feel like a genuine invention to me. It's usually like something technical, like a different way to distort something, or like creative editing, or something digital. So really the types of things I'm looking for are like these genuine expressions of who these people are. And I feel like, to some extent, the more that's been layered on top of what is called metal today, and what is probably a quest for heaviness, actually obscures it obscures the people and the nature of the expression underneath it. It's like, for me anyway, it's harder for me to just understand what they're about and who they are, because it's like I can't fucking understand what they're saying, or there's a lack of things for me to latch onto and go like, oh, that's why these guys are cool, So I have a hard time with that. And that's probably just due to the internet. It's probably the same way that like phones and the internet isolates us as humans. I think it probably isolates us the same way as music fans, and it makes us harder in the same way that phones and digital technology makes it harder for us to truly connect with each other. I think it's probably also making it harder for music fans to truly connect with music artists.
Yeah. I think back to something you said earlier where you were talking about there was a lot of time, especially in high school, sitting in the car, listening to music before school or after school, whatever. And I while you were talking, I was thinking about, those own memories of because I had this 1974 VW Bug was my first car.
Perfect.
And, I had this shitty fucking stereo with a cassette deck in it. But I remember really early things sitting around with one of the guys in my band and just sitting there listening to Power Slave and being like, fuck yeah, and we're just connecting and having this shared experience, right? Where I'm sitting in the driver's seat and one of the guys was sitting in the passenger seat, and just the two of us in my car, listening to fucking 2 Minutes to Midnight and going, oh, fuck.
Right.
Listen to this,
So in Denver, when you were growing up, did you ever manage to sneak backstage at a show and connect with one of these artists that was previously just completely exalted, and then just so that you could have a personal connection with somebody that you never thought you would ever even be able to see face to face?
I mean, none of the big artists, but because I didn't go to that many large venue shows. We went to a lot of small shows, and I was really into the punk scene for a while. And I went to a lot of small punk shows at coffee shops and stuff where there was no stage. The band is just playing on the floor with the rest of us and stuff. But yeah, I mean, there were definitely some moments where, we'd have an interaction with somebody who was in a band, and you're like, oh, Like I remember one time there was this punk band called Wrecking Crew. And I went and saw them. This was up in Boulder, and I saw them. And I remember I had been into this. I was like, these guys are cool. I'd heard about them, and I knew that they were coming to town. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go see the show. And I got there, and I think I went to that show by myself. Maybe I went with somebody. It doesn't matter. But I get there, and it was like, Saturday afternoon or whatever. And we show up, a couple hours before, and the band had like just pulled up. And they're driving this shitty old Ford van, towing literally a U-Haul trailer, because that's how a lot of bands still tour. And, these dudes get out of the van, and they're just like normal guys, like you and me, And so like, I was like, hey, do you guys need a hand loading in, And the guy was like, the guitarist from the band, I didn't remember their name, I'm not into them anymore, but he was like, yeah, man, yeah, grab this. And so here I am, I'm like 16 years old, and I'm like, into this band, and these guys probably aren't more than 3 or 4 years older than I am, but I'm like helping these guys like carry their amps into the venue. And I'm like, this is fucking cool, This is really a cool experience to have that connection. That's one of the things I still love about why I love small venue shows so much today. And what I really love about metal in particular, nobody's too cool for anything. Nobody's too cool to talk to you. So now that I'm sort of older and I'm at a point in my life where I just don't give a shit, I'll go up and talk to whoever, like, hey man, that was a good set, and we just get to talking or whatever. And I love that, at these small shows and in the communities and at festivals and stuff. And that's honestly one of the underlying precepts of the whole purpose of this podcast is that, I'm going to interview musicians too. And I interview musicians, but every musician is also a metal fan, right? And so everybody has that same kind of experience in their past. Like the first time they with this band, whatever, I helped that band load into their venue, and they were just like cool with it. But yeah, no, like I never snuck backstage like at an Iron Maiden show and like got drunk with Bruce Dickinson or whatever. Like that was never, I would have been too scared to do that.
Well, I will put one sort of errant data point into your matrix, which is that it was sort of a sport for us. And in Hawaii, it was a little easier, but to try to get access, and either it was a better seat or it was backstage to like steal a beer, or maybe we could like see or meet the artists. Like ultimate goal was just like, let's just try to figure out a way. Megadeth played the Queen Theater, which was an old porn theater in this Kaimuki neighborhood of Oahu. Mm-hmm. It was really the first non-huge arena metal concert that we were able to go to, like a big band. And so it was like probably So Far So Good So What era.
So you're talking 88.
Yeah.
Roughly. Okay.
Yeah. 87 or 88. And they were like 2 hours late. Like they played this venue 2 nights in a row, and they didn't normally have concerts at this venue. But when they did, it was like a promoter would just like come in, take over the place. And then like for the next 6 months, it would just be rat infested and empty. But so it's like 2 or 3 hours late. We waited anyway. Sacred Rite opened up. And then there was like this huge time where everybody was just sitting in there waiting for Megadeth. And they finally came and they played, and it was cool. It was really cool to see them. We're really close and stuff. And we snuck backstage, and Dave Mustaine and Dave Ellefson were in this hallway downstairs that connected sort of like this little kind of bigger area, like where you could have like a meet and greet, or people, your stupid label people could be. And then there was the dressing rooms in the back, the green room or whatever. And there's this hallway that connected them. It's a tiny hallway. And if you encountered somebody else in the hallway, you would almost have to like touch butts, to get past each other. And the Daves were standing there, and we like kind of inched closer and closer, and they were having a conversation with one other person. We were waiting very respectfully. And then when that conversation ended, we just kind of like inched up to him, and my buddy, who was completely like unprepared, like gave him a thumbs up or whatever. And Dave Mustaine just started making fun of him so bad. He was like, "What, do you need a light? Well, you want me to stick that up your ass?" Like he was just being such a dick. And we didn't even want to talk to him at that point. We were like, "Oh, I see. We waited 2.5 hours, and we're down here and waited respectfully for you to end your conversation, and then you're just going to be a dick to us." Like, so actually, he is a dick and is not very indicative of what you mentioned, but I have totally observed, which is that most metalheads are not too cool, and it's because they spent their lives being not cool and being told how uncool they are and being treated like shit and like not cool by so many people. And so they know what it feels like.
Yeah.
So it is inclusive. But what's so weird about that is like how much there is a uniform. Like if you go to an Iron Maiden show today, it's really hard to find somebody that's not wearing an Iron Maiden shirt at an Iron Maiden concert in a giant arena.
Right.
And if it isn't an Iron Maiden shirt, it's adjacent, like in some way.
Right.
That's always really kind of struck me as odd. Like the amount of conformity in metal around the uniform is so weird, but it's not, but there's conformity in the music too. Like, you know, it's real easy to become not metal by experimenting or doing something differently with your music for the audience to call you not metal enough it's a fine line, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, my favorite example of that is I'm just looking at this Opeth comic book that you have on the table here. So I'm going to use them as an example. Look at the backlash that happened with Opeth fans when they released Heritage. Like, they're like, okay, we'll let you make, you know, the Damnation album. You can make an all clean vocals, kind of acoustic, quiet album. Cool. We'll let you do that. That's still metal as fuck, right? But when you make Heritage, all of a sudden, there's all these old school Opeth fans who are like, fuck you, I'm out. And I'm like, what's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
This is a fantastic record.
Yeah.
It's not metal enough for you?
Well, and here's the thing. Why isn't it okay for you to not like something?
Right.
Like, that was the thing with Metallica. Like, I totally I was not on board. Like, after Justice for All actually I was starting to edge out already.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they just did what I knew they were going to do, like, and continue to do what I know they're going to do. Right. And it's okay. There's other stuff for me to listen to. And it's like, it's actually, I'm happy for them. Like, great, go do other things. Like, maybe in your explorations, we'll meet again. Maybe you'll do 10 shitty things that I don't like, and that's fine. But your 11th thing will be as a, you know, a byproduct of this process that you've gone through. It's going to be amazing. Who knows? Right. I'm different too. Right. So like, we're all changing. At least if we're healthy human beings, we're changing. So
yeah. And I think I recently had this experience with observing some online discourse around the anticipation of the new Metallica album that came out, the 72 Seasons album. Mm-hmm. And I found this discourse, like, people falling into two camps, right? There were people who were like, you know, I fucking love Metallica. They're the best band ever. Da 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 da. And then there's people who are like, Metallica's dead to me. They suck. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, I sort of get the appeal of wanting to be on the side of like, okay, I was into Metallica before they were cool, and I get to decide that Metallica sucks now or whatever. I sort of get the appeal of that on some level. But on the other hand, I'm like, what's the point in that? Like, if somebody likes Metallica today, for whatever reason, they could be my age, they could be 20 years old. Who gives a shit? Mm-hmm. Like, why would I want to like shit on their fun, on their enjoyment of a band? Like, I don't really care. If somebody's into Metallica, like, I listened to the new album and I'm like, I think it's actually better than the last couple albums they've done. But I'm like, it's not for me ever going to be in the universe of Master Puppets and Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All for me, or Injustice for All, really. But I'm not gonna waste my time trying to convince somebody that Metallica sucks. Why? Like, because I don't think they do. Right. I think that they're just very good at doing what they do, and I think there's probably some valid criticism of Metallica that's worth discussing. But I think this whole idea of like saying, oh, they're just like, they're sellouts or whatever. It's like, okay, what's the point of that conversation? I don't see the point in that conversation. I don't see the point in trying to shit on someone else's fun. I can't think of a better way to say it. Right.
And we're back to conflict. And I think, I think it's something that metalheads innately like gravitate towards. And sometimes it seems like people are trying to create conflict artificially where it doesn't exist, and they're misguided in using metal as sort of the catalyst for that, because usually it's where you retreated when you were in conflict. It's like where you got your army and your strength and where you got your inspiration to like survive the battle, not the thing that you used to create a battle that didn't need to exist in the first place with people who you should just respect and agree with already, that you agree to disagree. Right.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, look at the conflict that came out of, just look at the origins of Megadeth. And, we were talking about them earlier, the conflict between Dave Mustaine and Metallica has sustained Dave Mustaine's entire personality for 35 years.
Right. It's his biggest claim to fame.
Is that he used to be in Metallica.
Which is a shame because he's made some incredible music that he should just stand behind on his own.
I totally agree. But it's really funny to me. But you're right. I think the conflict is a really interesting comment because it is inherent to a lot of people's identity in being a metalhead. And I think, the conversations I've had with people about this topic of, how they got into metal over the years that I've had, for a lot of people, it was, the conflict is a theme for sure.
Yeah. And also, have you ever known a metalhead that was good at fighting, physically fighting?
No.
Like they're always just so it's like a means of survival. And for people who they're not averse to conflict, but they're fighting for something, but they just aren't very good at throwing punches, which I think is just funny.
Yeah. Well, there's that. I mean, that's a great point. I think generally speaking, metalheads are pretty much like the nicest people I've ever met. I mean, in the main, right? There's the odd like asshole that you run into, but for the most part, like these are some of the sweetest, kindest, gentlest people I've ever met. Like they have like hearts of gold, and they'll do anything they'll do anything to promote a band they love. They'll do anything to like make sure that other people are having a good time at the show. I was at a deathcore show like a couple weeks ago, and somebody very obviously fell down and got hurt in the pit. And like the band stopped in the middle of their song and was like, hey, pick that guy up. He's hurt, And they didn't start again until he was like, okay. And had moved out of the way, like that doesn't happen in every scene. Right. Somebody gets hurt at a concert, the musician goes on. Like this is a band, this is a band that's touring with Mastodon and Gojira right now, And I was like, I don't really get into their music, but I was like, kudos to them.
Yeah.
For doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it ought to be, is like we take care of each other. Like the people in the scene take care of each other. And I've seen that over and over and over throughout the years. Somebody falls down in the pit, some big dude is there, is the first person to pick them up.
Yep.
Yep. I love that.
Yep.
I just love that. I love metalheads because I always feel, my joke about metalheads is I feel like, they're like spiky on the outside, but they have a soft, mushy center, Because it's true. You sort of look, if you were to be somebody who never knew anything about metal, and you were to walk past like any garden variety metal venue on any given Saturday night, you'd be like, oh my God, these people are really scary looking. There's like dark eye makeup and spikes and leather and whatever. But these are like the nicest people you're ever going to meet in your life.
It's a front. It's a front because it's like, it is like the antler or the armadillo spikes. It's like, there is a soft, squishy center in there. And if you get past that front, then it's like basically they're dead, And so I think being a metalhead is you have to put that on the outside to defend yourself and scare away like as many of the potential threats as possible. Because if they get through that line of defense, you don't have much left to defend yourself with. It's like, but also I will say metalheads 100% of the time, in my experience, go down swinging. There's not a lot of running away in the metal community. It's usually like you stand up and you might go down, but you go down swinging at the last minute,
Yeah, and you stick up for each other too. Yeah. And I think that's the really important part is that even if, as individuals, you're right, we're probably not like great at throwing punches, but as a community, I'd rather have a bunch of metalheads have my back.
Absolutely.
Than most anybody else. Because I know that they'd do anything.
That's right.
Just as I would do anything for them.
That's right.
Do you have other like stories you want to tell or other things you feel like are germane to this conversation?
Yeah. So I have some stories about sort of some conflict stuff and some metalheads are the best people ever stuff. So
yeah. So let's talk more about that.
So in the conflict category, I had some friends from Hawaii in this band called Aftershock. They moved to San Francisco, the Bay Area, Hayward specifically, and they changed their name to Wrecking Machine. And they were in the same scene as Machine Head and sort of those types of bands. So this is like the early 90s. And I went down to visit them and see what they were up to or whatever. And we went to this house party, and it was like River's Edge, but like the Hayward, East Bay version. And everybody had like the high tops that were only halfway lace and the tongues pulled all the way out and super skinny and probably doing a lot of speed. And, we took the van to 7-Eleven and we got a 40-ounce of malt liquor, and then we got a gigantic big gulp of Mountain Dew, and we drank the Mountain Dew first, and then we drank this. This was all new to me. I'm like, fucking you guys, your stomachs must be literally metal. And so we went to this party, and I was totally fish out of water. And at this point, like, I was in college. I had left my band that I moved to Seattle in, still had my hair, but I was into other things. I was listening to metal, but I was also listening to Naked City and like weird experimental jazz and just all kinds of weird shit. I was a music director at the college radio station, so I was exposed to a lot of different things. But I'm visiting my metal friends. I'm at this metal party, and I'm standing there and I'm talking to these two guys. And I had been in this party, I had been overhearing, because I don't know anybody there. Nobody's really reaching out to talk to me. I was overhearing all these conversations, listening for like a point of entry so that I could be like, oh, hey, what are you guys talking about? Like, I'm from Hawaii, or I'm from Olympia. And I just kept hearing people talking about how Rob Flynn was going to be there. Everybody's like, oh my God, is Rob Flynn here yet? He's not here yet. I heard he was coming. I'm hearing he's going to be here. Is Rob Flynn here? Rob Flynn, right? And, I was into his previous band, so I knew who he was. And I was like, I had heard Machine Head, but I just thought he was like kind of this overrated, in that world of Bay Area metal, in that world of like coming out of thrash. I just thought he was okay. He was just okay. And I was really sort of surprised at how excited everybody was for his imminent arrival. So I'm standing there and talking to these two guys, and then they're like, is Rob here yet? Is Rob coming or whatever? And I'm just like, I just said, yeah, I just really can't wait to fucking see Rob Flynn. He's so fucking awesome. I just can't wait till he gets here. Like, I just started being really sarcastic. And they're all, oh yeah? I'm like, yeah, I just can't wait, man. He's so great. He's so awesome. And they're like, well, he's right over there. Let's take you to go meet him. And so these two guys grab me, and I'm like, oh shit. These two guys grab me over there, and they're like, hey, Rob, this guy, he just really can't wait to meet you. And they knew I was totally being sarcastic, right? So what turns out is that now I'm standing there in front of Rob Flynn and Phil Demmel, and they're basically, Phil is basically telling Rob, like, this guy is totally busting your balls over there. And where are you from? And why are you at this fucking party? And suddenly I'm about to get my ass kicked by half of Machine Head. Right? Which is not that unusual of a scenario for me coming from the environment that I just told you about. It's like I've stood in front of a wall of gigantic Samoan dudes and the football team who wanted to kill me. Like, I've been here before. And I was like, hey, look, I'm just really sick of hearing everybody talk about how great you are. I think it's just sort of unnatural and weird, and it must make you feel completely weird too, to have people talk about you like that. And right. And then like, I just kind of flipped it on them. And so that was an interesting situation, because I felt like here is a scene that's like eating itself alive. Here's like the snake eating its tail, where it's like, we come from this conflict. We're fighting to earn our place in this world and to be respected as musicians. And like, this band is actually like seeing success, and they're on top. And then they take the time to give a shit about what I think about their guitar player. Like, why are you seeking out this conflict? Why are you creating this conflict from out of nowhere? Right. So that really struck me as weird and kind of unmetal.
How did he respond to that?
He totally got on board with what I was saying. He was like, yeah, it is kind of lame. Like, I basically set him up so he had to say either, yeah, it's weird that people are saying that, or I really love it when people are talking about when I'm going to get to a party, because I'm such a like douchebag,
Right.
So I put him in this position where he had to agree with me.
Yeah. So you talked your way out of it again.
Yeah. And then I quickly went outside
and
pretended to smoke cigarettes. Okay. So, and then another thing too, that like metal taught me, and specifically I got this from Cliff Burton, but is like standing up for, is being authentic and standing up for what you believe in. in the face of conflict, in the face of adversity or whatever. And being authentic and being real. And so like, I've never really gravitated towards bands that were like I love Merciful Fate, you know, that might be the showiest kind of fantastical metal band that I ever really liked. I'm more into the like people who are real and kind of talking about real shit. But I always thought, you know, fuck, Metallica, they were like kind of the first ones to teach me that, you know? So they played it here at the Seattle Center Arena for 2 nights on the Justice Tour. And I was there both nights. And I witnessed one. Were you there?
No.
Okay. So
I was still living in Denver at that point.
Did you see the tour?
I did see the tour in Denver. Yeah.
Okay.
They came through and I saw them. I saw them twice on that tour. I saw them at McNichols Arena, and then they came back around later that summer. So the McNichols show, I think I'm gonna have to look at the dates, but it was like over the winter. It was like January, February, and then they came back that summer and played at Red Rocks, and I saw them there too.
Ooh, that would be good.
Yeah.
So there's a moment in the tour, and I'm curious to know whether or not they did it in both of the shows that you just mentioned because they were so far apart from each other. There's a moment in the tour where the stage is destructing.
Yep.
And Jason jumps off of the drum riser right as this piece of the lighting rig sort of dislodges from the rig and swings down on a hinge.
Yep.
And he jumps up and it barely misses his head, right? And the first night, did they do that?
Yeah, they did that.
Both times?
My memories of the Red Rock show are a little foggy and possibly
Understood.
potentially contaminated by some substance use.
Correct.
But
Okay.
I remember the McNichols show very vividly.
Okay.
And yes, I remember that moment where that thing swung and it was like this breathtaking moment where everyone was like, oh my God, he almost got hit.
Yeah,
Like, it was crazy, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I felt the same way.
Yep.
First night. And then it happened exactly the same way the second night. And I was like, oh, that's totally scripted. Like that's totally,
Yeah.
that's not real. And then there was another thing where James said the same jokes in between songs both nights. He like said the same shit.
Yeah.
So I was just like, what the fuck? Like I remember in that second show just going, wow, okay, crushed. Like the fucking arbiters of authenticity have just phoned it in in 2 major ways. Like,
Right.
And how could they not anticipate that people would go both nights? How could they not internalize what it would mean to their audience for them to clearly be just kind of like on the train doing the same show night after night? Like, at least create an illusion that that's not happening. I know that. So, right. So like, I was really kind of fucking bummed, you know? So then the next night I'm at this nightclub in Seattle called the Vogue, and it was like, I think it was reggae night or something. And so I'm at the Vogue and I'm standing there, and back by the bathrooms, Lars is talking to his dad, who at the time lived in Seattle. So, and they're standing in the back, and there were other people there that night. So it was like Ian Astbury was there because the Cult was opening for them on that tour.
Yeah, I remember that.
And some guys from Pearl Jam were there and stuff, or Mother Love Bone at the time, Mother Love Bone. So it was a bunch of people there. And I saw a lot.
Didn't they tour with Queensryche too? On that tour? Didn't Queensryche
maybe.
support them on some of those dates? Because I remember seeing, I think one of the shows that I saw them, I'll have to go back and look at the set list and stuff. But
I don't know, because I just saw the Cult open both.
Yeah, I saw the Cult one time, and I saw Queensryche one time because it was maybe Operation Mindcrime. I can't remember. But I was like, okay, there's another Seattle band. Anyway, so
yeah,
Ian Astbury.
So they're all those
I
people
interrupted
there.
you.
And, no problem. So Lars is standing back by the bathroom talking to his dad, and I waited, and I was standing there, and I waited. I'm like, I'm gonna go fucking talk to Lars. So I waited, and they finished their conversation, and I was like, hey, Mr. Ulrich, hey. He's like, yeah, what? You know, and I'm like, hey, my name's Matt. I grew up in Hawaii. And I just want to tell you that as kids, we really appreciated and understood what it meant when you brought your opening band. Well, first of all, when you even came to play for us.
Yeah.
And then you brought your opening band, and then you brought your entire stage set. Like, I just want to let you know that was acknowledged and appreciated at our level. Like, we didn't just think it was an awesome concert. We were like, those guys are cool for doing that. And I just want to let you know.
Yeah, we didn't take it for granted.
Like, that many years later, thank you. Like that was fucking appreciated, right? He's like, oh yeah, right, cool, yeah, that's great. All right, thanks. I was like, okay, yeah, cool. So, it really meant a lot to me, and he really taught me a lot about, about just doing the right thing and stuff, and authenticity. And Metallica's always really represented this authenticity kind of theme for me. And so I went to both shows like the last couple nights, and it was great. It was a good show, nice work and everything. But like, I just got to say, like, it's just kind of weird that James said the same things both nights in a row. It just kind of seems like it goes against the whole authenticity thing. Like, because it's not authentic. It's like a script, He just looks at me. His whole expression changes. He looks at me. He just goes, what, you think that after James plays a show, we're on tour every night. We're playing all these fucking huge arenas. After the show, James is going to go back to the bus and he's going to sit down and he's going to write some more fucking jokes. You think that he's like some kind of a stand-up fucking comedian or something? What you think we have time to fucking do this? Like, he just started railing on me. And I just stood there and just kind of listened to his defense of his buddy. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, right. I don't expect him to be a comedian. You're right. I mean, it must be tough. It must be a tough gig, right? But he fucking took me to town. And again, I was like, what is it about metalhead where, you spend your whole life fighting for your own right to be who you are, and then you're challenged in a small, minor way by somebody who clearly has demonstrated like that they know your stuff. They've given you tons of money. Like they have all your records. They went to both of your shows and they really appreciate and love you. And then you're going to tear them down because they have this one little like question about like, and it wasn't even a criticism. It was phrased more of like, what does this mean in terms of the greater scheme of things? When you're talking about authenticity, how do you rationalize this inauthentic moment in your universe, right? And he was like, almost like he wasn't even sophisticated enough to break the conversation down to that level.
Yeah, I mean, I won't presume to understand what was going through Lars's mind at that moment, but what I was thinking about as you were telling me this story, and I want to take this back to like your comment earlier about Merciful Fate, right? I think about this is this aspect of metal, when you get to the level of bands like Metallica or Merciful Fate, it's theater, and there's a spectacle aspect to it, right? So when on the Justice tour, that piece of the lighting rig swings down, and it was all very scripted and rehearsed, right? And designed to be that way. And those jokes were scripted and written to be delivered the same cadence, the same rhythm, the same time every night, over and over and over for that tour. And they toured that album for 2 years or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember how many total shows they played on that tour, but it was hundreds. And so there's a spectacle aspect to a band like Metallica doing that at that time. Because with the exception of, the other bands obviously that were doing stuff like that, you mentioned Dio earlier, and yeah, I remember going to see Dio in the 80s and being like, that is ridiculous.
So that's what a laser looks like.
Wow. Yeah. Like, and here's Ronnie James Dio with like having like a laser sword battle with a fucking dragon, and I'm like just blown away, Yeah. And, and then of course, the granddaddies of spectacle, of course, is Iron Maiden, right? Nobody's ever done it better, in my opinion, and still doing it amazing. But even a band like Merciful Fate, or I'm super into black metal, so there's like a lot of theatricality to that stuff as well. It doesn't necessarily take to the realm of spectacle like it does, with Maiden and Metallica and Dio, but there's sort of a campy, theatricality to black metal that's absolutely part of the appeal, and is totally scripted and is maybe not super authentic. Like, do I really think that King Diamond walks around and goes to the fucking grocery store wearing corpse paint? No, he does not. I guarantee you. He's like a normal dude. He's weird, probably. I've never met the guy, but it's theater.
Yep.
And so what is theater's purpose? Like, why do we as human beings love to be entertained in these ways, right? It's because it taps into something in us that makes us feel human, right? It connects us to each other. It makes us feel, maybe we feel scared a little bit. Maybe we feel like totally elated. Maybe we feel like, I don't even know what the feelings are. Everybody's feelings about it are probably different, but this kind of thing, like seeing this reflected in the ways that we're being entertained, it connects us to our like selves and to our humanity and to this community that is of people that surround us. It makes us feel like we're part of something. You know, we saw that moment. You and I both described, like you saw it in Seattle and I saw it in Denver, but that like breathtaking moment of seeing Jason Newsted almost get his fucking head taken off by this swinging piece of lighting gear, that tapped into like fear. We're like, oh God, what if he got his head taken off?
Yep.
You know, so that's a real...
Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be metal as fuck if the dude literally got killed by his own set, you know? So yeah, I mean, these are the things that make us want to keep coming back, right? So I guess, you know, I get your point and I see it, and I think it's awesome that you challenged Lars on it and asked him to defend it. I think it was a dick for responding the way he did, because he could have responded in 50 better ways, like the way he did, like to go off on you about that. He could have been like, hey, well, let me explain to you what our thought process was about this. But that doesn't seem like his style. I don't know. But I don't know. Again, I've never met the guy, so I don't know.
Well, the thought process is, I mean, that's the blocker right there.
Perhaps. So yeah, I think, you know, it's just about like, it's the connection, right? It's why we keep going to see live music, because it has that emotional effect on us. Whatever that emotion may be, it has an effect that is real. And especially now when we're all so like atomized and dispersed and disconnected from each other, going to see a show is a communalizing, it's a bringing together of people, and it's sharing that experience together. Just like, you know, if you and I were sitting in the front seat of my VW Bug in, you know, 1986, listening to Master of Puppets or Power Slave and going, whoa, whoa. It's a shared experience. Yep. Like that's what this is about. You know, it's a huge part of what this whole thing is about for, I think, so many of us, whether we have thought about it in those ways or not. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe you've added some sort of a better understanding for me, help me understand a little bit better about what I like and what I don't connect as much with in metal. And I think it is absolutely like, I don't connect as much with the theatrical, just like the fantasy content isn't, I mean, and it was like when Iron Maiden and Judas Priest were like the most metal thing I was listening to, for sure. Like I was definitely into that. As I got older, I think Metallica kind of changed things for me and turned it more into like the news for metalheads. Like, and I wanted more realism and less like fantasy. And so maybe that's why I'm having a harder time connecting with some of the more modern stuff. Is just, it's less about struggle and being an outcast and more about stuff that I just storytelling. You know, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, not everybody's ever going to always relate to everything that's out there, you know?
Which I think should make the non-realistic stuff more appealing and more universally appealing and broader appealing, because it's like everybody likes a good story, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that makes us like human. That's part of our humanity. I mean, we are storytellers by nature.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, whatever, Four Horsemen, you know, it's a story. So, okay, so I'll tell you one more story. So,
please.
And this is on the other side. This is like somebody in metal being fucking awesome. So
nice.
So I was music director at KAOS, like I mentioned, in Evergreen. And I was at a point in my collegiate music direction internship, unpaid position in radio career, where I was being asked to speak and moderate at conventions and panels and stuff. So at a college radio panel at this convention called Gavin, which was in San Francisco. And Gavin was actually huge hip hop trade magazine and metal, but they had a small little college radio section in the magazine, but it was really like, it wasn't CMJ, it wasn't Billboard or Hits. It was like kind of an alternative thing. And then, you know, of course, when Nirvana hit and everything, it became all about that. But anyway, so it was like, there's some sort of more specific genre stuff going on there. And it was a really big hip hop and metal, a place where hip hop and metal corners of the industry would get together and trade business cards and stuff. So I'm in this college radio panel and I'm moderating, and all those college radio panels at that time were basically like a bunch of people getting up and trying to be more indie than the other person, right? And it was just like, I'm more indie than you because at my station we do this and that, and we only play these records. And I was totally guilty of that too. And at a certain point had kind of ascended, I gotten over that, and I was just sort of like making fun of everybody doing that at a certain point, and myself included. So that was my panel. And, but I knew, and I looked at the schedule, that at the same time as my panel, all the way across the other side of the convention center, Ronnie James Dio was also on a panel about metal, and they were exactly overlapping. So I didn't really care as much about my panel as I cared about Ronnie James Dio being there and having potential access to Ronnie James Dio. So the day before, I went to Amoeba on Haight Street, and I looked for something that I could get him to sign. And I'm not a big autograph chaser. In fact, I don't think I have maybe I have 2 or 3, but I had this sort of plan that would be like an entry point into a conversation. So I was looking for stuff, and I found the first Elf record, which, if you don't know, Elf is a band that became Rainbow, but was not his early kind of doo-wop, like rock roots things. Go watch the Dreamers Never Die documentary. It's amazing about Ronnie James Dio, but Elf was like his first kind of like major label heavy rock thing, produced by Roger Glover from Deep Purple. And I found the CD version of that at Amoeba. I was looking for the LP, but I found the CD version. It's the only thing they had. And so I had that in my bag. And I ended my panel early. I actually, 10 minutes before my panel was over, I gave the microphone to somebody in the audience who had asked a good question. And I'm like, it's your panel now. Have an awesome time. I'm out. So I started running with my friend Sue. We ran all the way across this huge convention center. And I come running into the room where Ronnie James Dio just had his panel. It's over now. And he's standing there and he's talking to somebody. And I just do my thing. And I'm like, again, waiting for a nice, respectful opportunity to just, And so I wait, and he's standing there, and somebody else is about to get him. And I'm like, oh, hey, Mr. Dio. Hey, hi. Hey, so I did a panel. We're fellow panelists. Like, I try to like establish some sort of like reason why you should talk to me. I'm a college radio music director, but I really love your work. And I saw like your tours in Hawaii when I growing up, like this one and that one. I'm just going through all the stuff. I'm like, but hey, I wanted to show you this. And so I got out the Elf CD, and he's like, oh, wow, I didn't know they made this on CD. I was like, yeah, I found it yesterday, and it was really cool if you could sign it for me or whatever. And so he's like kind of getting his pen up, and I said, hey, I know you're working on a new record right now. And I'm just wondering, when you're in the studio and you're in the act of creating, and now knowing that like digital audio and digital technologies is like how people are consuming your music, it's not on these analog formats anymore. It's on CDs. And does that change your creative process? Like when you're sitting there and you're listening to the playback, or you're creating new music, are you specifically creating it with these new digital delivery platforms in mind? Does it change your creative process? Does it change the way you hear music? Does it change the way you think about making music? And he just looks at me, says, Matthew, back when Henry Ford created the automobile, I wasn't there, but I could imagine. You didn't see a whole bunch of people standing alongside the road, watching these brand new shiny cars ride by, saying, I really miss the time when we rode around in horse-drawn carriages. Get in the car, Matt. Get in the car. And then he just wrote, to Matt, magic, Ronnie James Dio, and handed me my CD and walked away.
I love it.
Yeah. So super cool guy. And, a perfect example of how to answer a question from a fan.
Because, again, he could have answered that in 50 different ways.
Such a great example. So I think, it's a nice kind of full circle thing where it's just like, metalheads come from all different places. They all have different kinds of attitudes and feelings. And just because you get to the top doesn't mean that you necessarily evolve away from or out of it. You know, some people are the same person that they were at the very beginning, and other people have become absolute monsters.
I kind of want to ask just a couple of really quick other things that are just sort of like fun.
Mm-hmm.
First one is, if you could have dinner, or drinks, or whatever with any metal musician, alive or dead, who would it be?
Cliff Burton.
Nice. How come? What would you talk about?
I'd be like, dude, let me tell you about this show in Seattle. It was so fucking awful. No, they just shit on everything that you fucking built, dude. No, I think that I would love to talk to Cliff Burton about everything but metal. Like, I think that he represented exactly as an archetype and as like a model for what I think is the coolest thing about metalheads is that they're not, yes, there's a uniform. And yes, like from the outsider perspective, if you only listen to the metal music, you would think, like it all sounds the same, or whatever parents used to say about whatever anybody says about anything that they don't know anything about. It's just like,
it all sounds the same.
Yeah.
All hip hop sounds the same.
Yeah.
All punk sounds the same. All metal sounds the same. All country music sounds the same. Whatever.
Right. It's just like
all jazz. It's bullshit, right? Yeah. It's not true.
When you zoom out at a book, it's just all the words look the same too, right?
True.
You have to zoom in and read it. So I think he's a perfect example of somebody who had such an interesting and diverse, rich outlook on everything from like history to literature to music, lots of really cool creative pursuits and ideas. And it's evident in his music in Metallica, but it's also just evident in just like the things that he would talk about. And he wasn't very vocal. So that's the other appeal of this, is just like, you didn't really hear much from him. So it would be super awesome to just sit down and talk to him in a way and just kind of unlock the puzzle. Because I think out of all of the people historically in metal who I've been impressed by, I know the least about what was going on in his head. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the primary appeal of that.
And that's our show for this week. You know, it's kind of funny. Back when I recorded episode 0, I said that I had never met a metalhead who hadn't answered the gateway question before. But then it wasn't long before I talked to Matt, and he just finished telling me at the beginning of this episode that he'd never been asked that question. So I guess the takeaway from this is that I should limit my use of the word never. Anyway, when I recorded that episode, Matt and I really got to talking about a whole bunch of stuff, and I edited our conversation down quite a lot, actually, to bring you this episode, which I realize is the longest episode of the show so far. So if you're listening, thanks for sticking with it. It means a lot to me. I trimmed out a large section of my conversation with Matt, and I'm going to save it for a bonus episode at some point in the future. So if you enjoyed this episode, this probably isn't the last time you'll be hearing from Matt on the show, so keep your eyes out for that. Also, Matt mentioned a lot of bands and a few specific songs and even a couple of specific riffs, and I decided to make a playlist on Spotify for those of you who might be interested in listening to some of the stuff Matt talked about today in a format that you can just sort of listen through the music and through his kind of journey. So I'll drop that link to that playlist in the show notes. This podcast is a production of Studio Portcullis. Our theme music is by Tauntaun. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. It's free and it ensures that you won't miss an episode. If you have comments or questions or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show, please email them to me at metalgatewaypodcast@gmail.com or slide into my DMs on Instagram @metalgateway. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you next week.